There is a quiet strength that the world rarely notices. It doesn't come from those who shout the loudest, nor from fists or threats. Instead, it comes from people who are calm, deep, and experienced. Those who have been wounded but refuse to let their scars define them. They are super empaths, souls who were once manipulated but now rise like sunlight after a storm. Do you know what scares a narcissist the most? It isn't loud resistance, it's the awakened gaze. It's someone who once loved them deeply but now no longer reacts. No more tears, no more attempts to fix things. That silence is thunder, shattering the mask they've worn for so long. Today's video isn't about revenge, nor does it encourage toxic toughness. Instead, we will walk together on the journey of a super empath, from being lost in a toxic relationship to discovering an inner strength capable of collapsing the entire manipulative system without a single shout. This is a bloodless battle, but one that breaks down every illusion the narcissist holds dear. If you've ever felt you're too kind, too compassionate, or too sensitive, perhaps you're holding a weapon you've never recognized before. Stay until the end of the video, because you might not only rediscover yourself, but also finally find the answers you've been seeking all these years. And if this message resonates with you, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell, because what's coming isn't just knowledge, it's an awakening. Sign 1. The super empath stops reacting and the narcissist begins to collapse. One of the most powerful moments in the journey of a super empath doesn't come from a dramatic declaration or a heated argument. It arrives when they simply do nothing. No reaction, no anger, no pleading, no explanations. They just fall silent. And that silence, paradoxically, becomes thunder in the narcissist's world, because for the narcissist, power isn't rooted in genuine love, but rather in their ability to control others' emotions. They don't necessarily want your love, they just need you to keep thinking about them, hurting because of them, angry because of them, worrying because of them. Any reaction, positive or negative, feeds their inflated yet hollow ego. When a super empath hasn't yet awakened, they usually react instinctively. They cry, they try to explain, they apologize for mistakes that aren't even theirs. But at some point, after repeated exploitation, after countless sleepless nights and endless self-questioning, something finally clicks. They suddenly see, and once they see, they change. This change doesn't announce itself with a loud bang. It arrives silently. The super empath begins to withdraw. No dramatic goodbyes, no final confrontations. They might remain in the same room, share a meal, or listen as usual, but emotionally and psychologically they're no longer there. They're no longer manipulable. And here's what panics the narcissist. They feel they're losing control without knowing exactly why. They can no longer read the super empath's expressions, their old tactics, blaming, feigning vulnerability, faking remorse, stop working entirely. The narcissist begins to feel frighteningly empty because they're no longer getting any response from the person they once manipulated like a puppet. The super empath's silence isn't passive, it's a form of supreme action. It's a refusal to provide fuel for a toxic system. It's choosing not to participate in a false drama anymore. And when the narcissist no longer has an audience to perform for, no longer has a victim to manipulate, no longer has reactions to feed on, they begin to crack from within. Here, silence doesn't mean surrender. Instead, it's an unspoken declaration, I see exactly who you are, and I choose not to be controlled any longer. A declaration, though never spoken, that lands the first critical blow, causing the narcissist's ego to begin its collapse. Sign 2. The super empath recognizes the pattern of manipulation and refuses to keep playing the part. No one enters a relationship with a narcissist fully aware of what awaits them. At first, everything seems perfect, the gentle words, the understanding gaze, the seemingly destined affection. But for the super empath, their deep hurt doesn't stem from weakness. Rather, it comes from loving genuinely and wholeheartedly. However, there's always a moment when love can no longer serve as an excuse for deception. The super empath, equipped with sharp intuition and profound inner insight, begins noticing subtle inconsistencies. They start seeing repeated patterns, apologies without change, irrational anger quickly forgotten as though nothing happened, blame shifting that makes them responsible even for the wounds they've suffered. Initially, they try to rationalize. Perhaps they're just hurting, maybe they need me to heal. But one day, the realization hits. This isn't accidental, it's systematic. It's a meticulously designed pattern of manipulation in which they're the main character, not to be loved, but to be exploited. When a super empath finally recognizes this truth, an irreversible shift occurs. They stop believing the narrative, they cease idealizing their partner, they stop blaming themselves every time something goes wrong, they start asking the crucial question, why am I the only one trying? This awakening doesn't come with loud anger or explosive confrontation. Instead, it's a quiet clarity, like sunlight pouring through a dusty window. Once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. The super empath begins stepping out of the roles they've played for too long. The rescuer, the unconditionally understanding partner, the endless forgiver. Realizing these roles had trapped them in a toxic cycle. As they refuse to keep playing these roles, the entire script, carefully constructed by the narcissist, begins to collapse. The narcissist loses their unconditional collaborator. They lose the background character essential to their starring role. They lose control over the storyline itself. The super empath doesn't need to shout, "You're a narcissist!" They simply stop acting. And in the narcissist's world of illusion, the truth, when no longer obscured, shatters the deception faster than any accusation ever could. Refusing to play the role isn't an act of rejecting love. It's the highest act of self-respect. It's the moment the super empath says to themselves, "I've given enough. Now it's time I choose me." Sign 3. The super empath changes their gaze, and the narcissist is no longer a legend. Not every action can shatter a narcissist's ego, but there's one thing that quietly yet devastatingly dismantles them from the inside out, when the person who once idolized them begins to see them through entirely different eyes. In the beginning, the super empath's gaze towards the narcissist contains everything: admiration, trust, compassion, and even the aspiration to heal together. With an open heart and a soul yearning for genuine connection, they offer a look full of hope, even when intuition softly whispers otherwise. But once the super empath awakens, that gaze shifts. It's no longer the gaze of someone striving to understand. It's no longer seeking goodness hidden behind hurtful behavior. Now it's a gaze of clarity, one no longer clouded by illusions or idealizations. And this precise shift is what shakes the narcissist to their core. Because for so long the narcissist has existed in other people's eyes, their entire ego depends on being perceived as the tragic victim, the irresistible lover, or the misunderstood genius. But when the super empath withdraws that idealizing gaze, when they no longer see someone special, but merely an insecure, controlling, empty individual, the legend crumbles. A narcissist cannot survive in a world where they're not idealized. They can't bear to be seen exactly as they are, without makeup, without the stories they tell themselves. They desperately need to be mirrored as extraordinary to sustain the fragile facade they've carefully erected like a theatrical curtain. The awakened gaze of the super empath becomes a mirror, not one reflecting the image the narcissist desires, but a mirror of truth, exposing every illusion they've built. This mirror doesn't need words, it merely needs presence. And the narcissist who thrives by escaping reality feels as if they've been stripped bare. The super empath doesn't need to insult, yell, or expose anyone publicly. They only need to look clearly, steadily, without judgment, and no longer with idealization. And for the narcissist, this is unbearable. That gaze, calmly and almost coldly, speaks volumes. I see you, not the image you want me to see, but the real person behind everything. From that moment, the narcissist ceases to be the protagonist of any story. They become simply a person, now illuminated by the very truth they've spent their entire life avoiding. Sign 4. The super empath speaks the truth, and that truth pierces every mask. Narcissists can handle anger, they can play with negative emotions, they can manipulate arguments, portray themselves as victims in accusations, and even twist your strong reactions as evidence that they are the ones being hurt. But there is one thing they cannot bend, distort, or endure, and that is the calm, unshakable truth. When a super empath awakens, they no longer react emotionally. They don't need to shout to be heard, nor cry to gain sympathy. They simply speak. But their words, emerging from deep within, a place once broken but rebuilt by truth, carry the power to dismantle every structure the narcissist painstakingly built. They say, clearly and steadily, "This isn't love, this is control." They say, "You aren't angry because you're hurt, you're angry because I no longer submit." They say, "You don't hurt me because I'm weak, you hurt me because I'm strong enough to care despite everything, and that threatens you." These aren't accusations, they're observations. Precisely because they're delivered without emotional weakness, they can't be twisted. The narcissist can't deflect or flip the narrative, because this time the game board itself has been overturned by something outside their control, undeniable truth. Truth doesn't need to scream, it only needs to be accurate. And it's this accuracy that sends the narcissist into panic. They thrive in grey areas, places where reality can be blurred, where they can insist you're too sensitive, imagining things, or making everything dramatic. But when truth is stated plainly, there's nowhere left for them to hide. The super empath becomes a mirror, unwarped and uncompromising. It doesn't make them look better or worse. It simply reflects reality. And what makes this mirror a powerful weapon is not intentional harm, but that it no longer reflects the image narcissists desire. Instead, it reflects the truth they've always fled from. Once truth is spoken and named clearly, it cannot remain hidden, and when the super empath states it, not to win but because they refuse to live in distortion anymore, the narcissist finds no refuge. The super empath doesn't demand confession, they don't seek apologies or recognition, they simply stand firmly in their truth, and that becomes the ultimate blow to the narcissist's coreless ego. Because that ego isn't afraid of defeat, it's afraid only of being clearly seen for what it truly is. Sign 5. The super empath sets real boundaries. No more negotiating, no more stepping back. There are people who say no, yet deep down still hope to be convinced otherwise. There are boundaries drawn only to be erased by tears, guilt, or loneliness. But when a super empath awakens, they no longer set boundaries in the hope of being understood. They set boundaries because they now truly understand themselves. For the narcissist, every boundary is merely an invitation to test limits. They don't cross those lines with immediate aggression. Instead, they gently push, they cry, they apologize, they promise. And if you retreat even half a step, they know you'll retreat further. That's why one of the things that terrify them most is when the super empath no longer backs down. When boundaries aren't just words, but actions. No need to shout, "I'll leave if you continue." Instead, they calmly state, "If this happens again, I will leave." And when it happens, they simply leave. No drama, no final warnings, just a quiet and non-negotiable truth. The super empath used to be someone who pursued peace, sometimes by sacrificing themselves. They used to soften their voice, explain and overly understand. But that only prolonged the cycle of pain. Eventually they realized that understanding doesn't mean permitting, and from that moment onward, their boundaries are no longer fences, but pillars. The narcissist can't manipulate someone who no longer seeks validation. When the super empath sets boundaries from their deepest self, not as a threat, but as an affirmation of self-worth, the narcissist realizes their game is over. Boundaries don't need to be complicated, they only need consistency. And that's precisely why the narcissist fails. They cannot shake someone who has become internally whole. The super empath no longer wastes time explaining why they deserve respect. They don't beg for kindness. They don't issue ultimatums. They simply preserve their own peace as something utterly non-negotiable. And for the narcissist, this is not just rejection. It's the end of their power. Because, to the narcissist, power only exists as long as you wait for them to change. But when you stop waiting, they become nobody. Sign 6. The super empath no longer needs closure because they've already ended the story within themselves. One of the narcissist's most subtle tactics is convincing you that you need them for closure. They make you believe you can't move forward without an explanation, an apology, or at least some acknowledgement that your pain was real. But that's simply another way to prolong dependence. And when a super empath awakens, they stop playing that game altogether. The super empath once waited patiently. They waited for a confession. They waited for the narcissist to acknowledge their wrongdoing. They waited for genuine remorse, or at least an ending that felt fair. But the more they waited, the more they hurt. Because the narcissist never intended to end things clearly. They withdraw, then return. They vanish, only to drag you into yet another cycle. For them, ambiguity is a tool of control. Then one day, the super empath realizes something deeply profound. Closure isn't something someone else can provide. It's something you create for yourself. From that moment forward, they stop. No more long, heartfelt messages. No more searching for answers in old memories. No more analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings. They look plainly at the simple truth. This person hurt them, repeatedly and without change. With that truth alone, they close the door themselves. No dramatic slam, no tearful farewell. They quietly turn the key, lock the latch, and walk away. When the narcissist returns, as they inevitably do, with phrases like, "You never truly understood me," or "I still think about you," the super empath doesn't even need to respond. Not because they're cold-hearted, but because they no longer require further confirmation of what they deserve. Closure stops being a destination. It becomes a state of being, a state where they no longer seek anything from the place that once broke them. And to the narcissist, this is unbearable, because when you no longer need their explanations, you've dismantled the final mechanism keeping them alive in your mind. The super empath doesn't run away, nor do they seek victory. They simply choose to no longer be a character in the narcissist's story. And when you don't stick around to hear the final chapter, the manipulative storyteller loses the only audience who once believed their story was genuine love. Sign 7. The super empath transforms pain into purpose and becomes unbreakable. No one leaves a relationship with a narcissist entirely unscathed. Some walk away with shattered hearts. Others lose direction, trust, even their identity. But there's a certain kind of person who, after hitting the absolute bottom of pain, rises with eyes forever changed. They are no longer victims, nor are they avengers. They are reborn. They become super empaths. For a narcissist, the greatest agony isn't abandonment, it's witnessing their once perfect supply not only survive, but shine in a way they can no longer control. Super empaths don't run from their past. They don't deny that they once hurt deeply, cried, and sacrificed themselves to exhaustion. But they refuse to let that pain remain a burden. Instead, they turn it into fuel. They transform it into wisdom. And ultimately, they transform themselves, from someone needing rescue into someone living with profound purpose. They no longer seek validation, acknowledgement, or understanding from outside sources. They discover their worth from within. From that clarity, they rebuild their lives, not to prove anything to the narcissist, but to reflect their own inner truth. They might begin a new career, one where they no longer minimize themselves for others' comfort. They may enter relationships based on equality, not mutual wounds. They might even use their past experiences to help others, not because they need to save, but because they've become a beacon for those still wandering in the darkness they once knew. Their presence is now impossible to manipulate. They walk steadily, speak clearly, and embody an energy inaccessible to the narcissist, not because they've built high walls, but because they no longer fear loneliness and refuse to accept anything unworthy of their value. This realization dismantles the narcissist's entire sense of self. Their ego, built on reactions, suffering, and dependence, now finds nowhere to anchor. The super empath doesn't need to witness the narcissist's collapse. They don't care what the narcissist thinks or feels. They don't look back because they've traveled so far that the manipulator's existence has lost all significance. This is the ultimate victory, not winning a battle, but winning at growth itself, when revenge becomes meaningless, when you're no longer defined by who hurt you, when you live, love, and contribute not for recognition, but simply because it's authentically who you are. The super empath doesn't merely escape, they shed their old self entirely, and in that profound journey they become what a narcissist will never comprehend, a whole, free, and unbreakable human being. You know, there's one thing narcissists never account for, a variable they can't control, measure, or manipulate: awakening. They can control you as long as you doubt yourself. They can manipulate you as long as you hold on to the hope that they'll change. They can keep you coming back as long as you still believe, if I just try a little harder, they'll finally see my love. But there comes a moment when your heart grows exhausted from endless giving without receiving, when your mind has cycled through enough irrational loops that you're no longer the same person. It's not that you've become bitter or closed off your compassion. Rather, you start recognizing the difference between kindness and self-destruction. You begin to understand that love isn't about endurance. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowance. Patience is not your fate. And from the very moment you grasp this, everything starts changing. Not externally, but deep inside of you. When you stop looking for answers from the person who hurt you and instead start listening to yourself, you've already taken the first step out of that toxic loop. Gradually, you'll no longer need validation from others to know you deserve love, because you'll already know it. Never underestimate the moment you choose not to respond to a message pulling you back into your past. Don't dismiss the first time you say no and truly mean it, even if your heart trembles. Don't undervalue the small action of turning off your phone, stepping outside and breathing deeply in the fresh air of freedom. These are quiet signs of an inner revolution. You are doing something the narcissist never could, facing yourself. You are doing something they cannot comprehend, letting go to live authentically. And most importantly, you are living again, not as a wounded person, but as a soul reborn from the ashes. Never let anyone shame you for loving the wrong person. That says nothing about you. Accept that you loved wholeheartedly, and that's not a weakness. It's proof of your courageous heart. Trust me, true strength isn't measured by how many doors you can close. It's measured by your ability to open a new door for yourself without needing anyone else to come along, because when you no longer need to be understood, accepted, or proven right, you become unbreakable, and that quiet calmness, that serene stillness, is exactly what makes the person who once manipulated you feel they can no longer touch you. If you're on that journey, the journey from pain to freedom, I want you to know you are not alone. Millions of people around the world are walking the same path, their feet scarred but their eyes brighter than ever before. Perhaps today, you're exactly at the point where they once stood, uncertain, doubtful, trembling, yet still choosing yourself, little by little, each day. Keep going, just take one more step, and another, and one day you'll look back and barely recognize the person who struggled to hold onto an unhealthy love. That person has grown, that person is you, and that person is stronger than you ever imagined. If you've stayed with me until this moment, then perhaps a part of you, or maybe your entire being, has walked through the darkness created by a narcissist. You've likely been caught in emotional games, once believed that love meant accepting pain, and held on to the hope that if you were patient enough, kind enough, forgiving enough, that person would finally change. But here's the truth. The only person you can truly change is yourself. And when you begin to change, not to please anyone else, but to live authentically, you're no longer easily controlled. When you stop reacting, they lose power. When you see the truth, they lose their illusions. When you speak undeniable truth, they lose the power to manipulate. When you set boundaries without stepping back, they lose their access. When you no longer need closure, they lose the lead role in your story. And when you walk away carrying a matured soul and living your true purpose, they lose everything. That isn't revenge. It's an ending. A quiet ending. Without public drama, without an audience. But it's real, decisive, peaceful. You don't need to become someone else to protect yourself. You just need to return to who you truly are. Because what makes a super empath invincible isn't the absence of emotions. It's their refusal to compromise with anything that costs them their true self. If you're currently on that journey, be patient, be gentle with yourself. Remember, every small step you take is one step the narcissist will never be able to follow. And if this video touched you, if you've seen yourself reflected in any part of it, I invite you to do two things. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content that will continue to support, empower, and illuminate your journey. Leave a comment. At which stage of these 7 signs are you now? Where have you found the light amidst your darkness? Because healing doesn't only come from silence, it also comes from connection. Perhaps your sharing will become the first spark of hope for someone else still wandering in the dark. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing yourself. And please remember, truth doesn't need to shout, it simply needs to be lived. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep moving forward, one step at a time, toward the person you were truly born to become.